100 kilometers away. So we're now talking about city region, which includes los Valles del Tuy, los Altos Mirandinos, Guatire, Guarenas, which is actually right over here where this map is. There's a satellite city of Caracas on the right side.
You would see it. It's not in this map, but it's like growing as we speak.
So this is an interesting aspect that, that in the newspaper reference that Hubert just talked about, they were saying one city should dominate over the other. In other words, the formal city, la ciudad dominante over the ciudad marginal, marginal city. But it's curious, it's happening the other way around. Actually, the marginal city is probably dominating over what they think is the dominant city. They, meaning, I see general consensus, the media. So it's also interesting that all mapping of Caracas, the barrios don't come out, they're white spots. And not only that, but the mapping's always incomplete. Satellite cities, new city regions, all these notions still need to be done. So it's important to remember that in addition to a regionalization process, we're fundamentally talking about urbanization. The majority of the world's population, as you know, lives in 400 global city regions, each over 1 million in size. Not only that, but it's estimated that all future world population growth will take place in those urban regions. Venezuela really is perfect case study here. The UN's most recent country report estimated that 87% of the country's population lives in cities, in an urban environment, with the densities up to 678 persons per hectare, higher than Manhattan's 515. What is new is the size of this density. In fact, as we look at regional urbanizations, we all need also to think about densification. The city-region concept proposed by Ed Soja provides a useful approach to understanding density issues. A perfect example here is that Los Angeles city region, which has been growing very rapidly. There are now more than 17 million people, and every hour another 23 people join them. Now, this is a place that you'd think, as the world's capital of low-density sprawl, that actually has surpassed the 5 boroughs of New York City as the densest urban area in the United States. If we're going to use density as a measure of sprawl or of sustainability, then we want compact cities. Then LA is the most compact, sustainable city in the US, and Caracas, the most sustainable city in Latin America. Well, of course, this is, in parentheses. All this does is point out that we have to realize that density and sprawl are old concepts of the city and the metropolitan area. They may not be as useful as when if we focus on the city region, all the regions that have influence on the city itself, or let's say the central core of that city, which is really the functional unit we should be concerned with. So this is an idea that's becoming more and more prominent. Economists, geographers agree that the regional economies are the driving force in the economic development, and the environment and transportation need to be coordinated at this level as well. This is an urgent issue in Caracas right now and in many other cities that highlights the importance of understanding this notion of regional urbanization. Urban Think Tank has been invited on the basis of our methodology to present with to the Venezuelan Ministry of Transportation to identify the study of 50 most strategically important cities and develop their potential networks for Venezuela.
It's actually interesting to point out that almost all those cities in Venezuela where this population, as Alfredo mentioned, is concentrated, they're along the pipelines and production facilities of gasoline. So again, it is petroleum that runs not only the economy, but it's also the economy that shapes our cities. So it's very important from our point of view to keep that in mind, because to look at urbanization or architecture as an isolated discipline makes it generally a very dubious intervention with outcomes that we know from the growth of modern cities all over the planet.
So this is Valencia, which is the third city away from Caracas. And as you can see, it's just one continuous carpet to Caracas, excluding certain valleys and valley areas.
What is happening actually in this regional urbanization is that this sort of urbanism is eating up the arable land. Caracas had been founded for a good reason in this valley where it is located. If you recall the this 3D image that we showed before, you might have seen that the city of Caracas is much higher than the sea level. It's about 1,000 meters above sea level. That is a valley which has an ideal, almost ideal climate, and it was also a very fertile valley. Nowadays, the entire zone between Valencia, Maracay, and Caracas, which is a stretch of land of about 250 kilometers, is about to look like that. That means that the most fertile soil, and although the climate is very, let's say, very friendly, Venezuela, the entire nation of the entire country has only 2.5% of fertile soil. The rest is rainforest or savannas or wetlands or however you want to call it. For agriculture, only 2.5% of that land can be used. And that leads to rather curious situations. Every loaf of bread that you buy in Caracas or in any of those other cities is made out of wheat that has been imported. So the footprint of our cities are dramatically expanding. So you cannot even buy a piece of bread which is not baked out of an imported flour in that city. So that's quite preoccupying. Now we would like to change to our second analytical concept, which is informal globalization. The other one was regional urbanization, to recall that. The informal city, long treated as an aberration or an exception to the standard of urbanism, is actually becoming the norm throughout the global south, and it does so as an integral part of the global economy. Our research shows that in Caracas, a growing majority of the city's inhabitants live in informal zones. That's about 60% of the inhabitants are living on 30% of the metropolitan areas in housing, which is similar to what you see here on the right-hand side. The improvisation that characterizes these zones resembles the plug-in, tune-up, clip-on architecture. Recall archigram. Unsurprisingly, this often collides with ordinances and laws, as in Caracas, with public spaces transformed in commercial strips and barrier houses projecting like rhizomes into the valleys. 40 years ago, Moshe Safdie's Habitat project at the Expo 67 in Montreal was an ultimately, maybe you could call it successful in its kind, but it didn't find models similar to it, high density, low scale housing, etc. It was an attempt for an affordable modular building system. The informal city has generated its own modular design logic, and it needs to be better understood rather than ignored or treated like an aberration. This is a central tenet of our ongoing architectural practice and research. Moreover, this informalization needs to be seen as an aspect of globalization, in contrast to traditional notions of urban informality as a consequence of poverty. The informal city has emerged throughout the global south, coincide tactically with the advanced capitalism. Its improvisation and flexibility make it a key aspect of, not an exception to, the globalized economy. And in this way, to bring it back into the architectural discussion, you could talk about an architecture that is less related to form and master planning, but it's rather related to an ongoing transformation process, which obviously has no final form, as it is a continuously growing structure. And in opposite to the plan or the master plan, it is actually exactly the opposite to it. It's the flexibility within this plan. So to underline as well, we are not against planning. We are just for another form of planning, which is definitely less technocratic, much more flexible, and that also needs a redefinition in many ways of the architectural praxis, as we think.
So it's important to recognize that we're not talking about informal city, also about something criminal. That's important. By large, it's not illegal. It's simply extra legal, outside the regulatory apparatus. It's also important to distinguish informal globalization from the older notion of informal tendencies as temporary, transitional, small scale, concerned with strategies for survival. That's the old notion. The new informal concept is completely different. Although it has sometimes